Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we are specifically going to talk about the character sheet on comicbook.com's coverage, actually statement on an emerging critical role story. So this is a little complicated, and the subject here is ethics in Dungeons and Dragons journalism. Let's just jump right into this. So there is right now a story emerging from one specific person, so about two specific people who are, about one specific person who is right now aligned, very closely aligned on Critical Role, right? And the story is incredibly disappointing, alarming, and sad making. That's the best way to put it. And you could tell I'm not talking about the story. I'm not giving you the details on the story. And the reason why is the story is the story, right? So basically what I want to talk about today is how I think the character sheet on comicbook.com did an absolutely fantastic job of navigating this emerging Critical Role story and communicating to its followers, to its subscribers, and at the same time showing very strong, very thoughtful Dungeons and Dragons journalistic ethics in a time where the Dungeons and Dragons community is not even acknowledging that these ethics are necessary, right? And there's this very strange conversation happening. All right, so there's this very dark story emerging about one person within Critical Role, right? And I'm not even going to touch any of that subject matter today, right? So character sheet on comicbook.com, which is right here on YouTube, and the reason why I'm talking about them is they're very unique, right? So what is special about them? Well, they are very special, and let's talk about how and why they are unique and special, right? So one, it's people doing Dungeons and Dragons news virtually every single day, right? And then rounding up that news at the end of the day and putting high production value on it, right? So high frequency, high urgency, high production values. That's very rare on any group that covers Dungeons and Dragons news. And these guys, they wouldn't say they cover Dungeons and Dragons news. They would tell you that they cover tabletop role-playing game news. But the reality is the vast majority, in my humble opinion, of their content is D&D specific or D&D adjacent, right? And the reason why is if you everybody's discovering this because everybody wants to move on from D&D, right? In the tabletop role-playing game community, right? And that's another thing is I think those communities are very distinct. There's the tabletop role-playing game community, and there's the Dungeons and Dragons community, and I don't think they're the same. I don't think they're even remotely the same. They are very different things. Okay, and so you reach this point where character sheet on the character sheet on comic.com it tweeted. They did a tweet and they said, "We are fully aware of this story. We are right now determining on whether we will even cover this story." Right? And the reason why is this story is very personal to this one person on Critical Role, and it has nothing to do. And actually, oh boy, it's very personal to them, right? And so character sheet on comic.com understands that if they cover this story, they're going to be very much up in this one person's business, like right up in their business, like super fast, right? And they're like, do we want to manage this super personal thing this directly, right? And so they're very hesitant to report on this story, right? So what they did was they said, hey, we're aware of it. And the reason why is they got people coming to them and saying, what's your thought on this? What's your thought on this? What's your thought on this? Industry insiders, their own personal, industry insiders, as well as just their own personal subscribers, right? Their own channel subscribers are asking them right away, hey, this major story's erupting. What do you guys have to say about it? You guys are a D&D, you are a tabletop role-playing game air quotes, which frankly, that's what everybody's finding is if you try to do tabletop role-playing game news, nobody's going to watch your channel, right? Like you can cover everything but D&D and not even get 1/10 of the views that a single D&D story will give you, right? It's, so that is something that we've learned from January 2023. January 2023, the OGL crisis, the manic panic, was a huge hinge in the history of Dungeons and Dragons. It will be in history books. There's no two ways about it, right? Like, and so what's really interesting is so they were saying, hey, we want you to be aware. We're aware of this story. We are taking 24 hours to decide if we're going to cover it. That is journalistic ethics. What's really fascinating is Ginny D, I feel like she just slammed into a wall like 2 months ago where she was in the middle of the OGL crisis and she was literally like interviewing Hasbro staff, right? Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro staff, and having to do everything like, a Watergate reporter had to do. And she's like, I want to LARP and talk about D&D. I don't want to be like, doing things as a Pulitzer Prize journalist has to do. And she was in that space and she did not want to be there. And that's exactly where we are right now. Is everybody's like, oh, I just want to talk about this fun little game and just have a lot of fun and it's going to be great. And then they go and they start talking about Dungeons & Dragons news. And get this, there are millions of dollars on the line. There are tens of thousands of jobs on the line. Actually, there are low millions of jobs on the line with Dungeons & Dragons now because it's directly connected literally to the fate of Hollywood, right? It's just released an American blockbuster attempt. There are millions of jobs that are connected to Dungeons & Dragons. Funko Pop jobs are connected to Dungeons & Dragons. Lego jobs are connected to Dungeons & Dragons. Like Magic the Gathering jobs are connected. Like there are low millions of jobs connected to Dungeons & Dragons. And the idea that we need anything but Pulitzer Prize level journalistic ethics in covering D&D news, that ship has sailed. That train has left the station, right? We actually need, for realsies, Dungeons & Dragons journalists, and nobody in the D&D community or in the tabletop role-playing game community wants to do this. Nobody wants to put on the suit and be the anchor, right? Put on the suit, comb their hair back with pomade, and go, good evening, folks. Like they all want to be like, oh, here's my opinion about this subclass, right? And and this thing happened in the news. And so that's the issue. That's where we are landing, and so this is the real issue that we need to deal with. So I think we've really reached a point, right, where Dungeons and Dragons journalism, we need actual D&D journalists, but no one, and I'm talking nobody, wants to give up the fun, wants to give up the playfulness of them just considering this like the moment you realize Dungeons & Dragons is not even remotely a game anymore. If Scott Garibay's right, it's a human flourishment tool. If even half the D&D community is right, it's a life brand, right? If a quarter of the D&D community is right, it's an element of Americana, right? Like it is no longer like Chutes and Ladders, right? Like we literally need journalistic ethics. And I am giving CharacterSheet.com their flowers, right? Like I have lots of opinions on them, but they did the job right this time. They did it 100% right. They let their subscribers know what they're doing, and they let them know they're aware, but they also let them know we're taking a day to think, because there's real ramifications to us opening our mouths on this, right? And I think that is incredibly wise, and I am incredibly thankful for them putting on their big girl pants and saying, yeah, we literally need Pulitzer Prize level actual ethics if we're going to proceed forward and cover Dungeons & Dragons, because there are real stakes on the ground. And so I really applaud CharacterSheet.com for what they're doing, and I think it's really fascinating to see what's actually happening with Dungeons & Dragons journalism. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get into the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.